Welcome in to the Atlanta Showdown, a kickoff special, both on Warchant.com and on BamaInsider.com. I'm Jeff Cameron of ESPN Radio. To my left is Kyle Henderson. He's of Bama Insider. Gene Williams, founder and administrator of Warchant.com. To my right, oh, the magnitude of this game, guys. Already getting hyped for this. We're going to be doing a series of shows, early previews, if you will, for the Florida State-Alabama game up in Atlanta. By the way, if Alabama and FSU are ranked 1-2 in the polls, even if it's 1-3 in the polls, it would be the highest ranked opening weekend matchup since preseason polls began in 1950. So obviously we're talking about an all-timer. Some of those matchups include going back to the early 80s, Nebraska and Penn State. That was 1 versus 4. We've seen Florida State involved in a matchup like this, as Alabama, obviously, but Florida State and BYU back in 91. BYU was actually ranked in the top 20 at that time. And
by Sammy Smith.
Yeah, Alabama just in 2016, obviously, Alabama and USC. So we've seen some really amazing matchups, but none quite as touted as this, if in fact it ends up that it's 1 versus 2 or 1 versus 3, and we think it likely will be. Now, going from there, Florida State has a ton of talent, returning some key people that have moved on, such as Dalvin Cook and DeMarcus Walker, for example. And Alabama, I believe, has 11 returning starters. And as always, when we talk about Alabama, it's a ton of talent. Let's take a look at, your thoughts on this opener, what it means to the program, and what it means for college football.
Well, it's great, first of all. I love that college football has kind of captured that first weekend before the NFL starts. You saw it last week, and it's great ratings, all these great matchups, and you can't, like you said, maybe the best opener in the history of college football. So, I mean, for that aspect, it's great. Obviously, you got two storied programs. And both of them interesting here. FSU's coming off that big win against Michigan. They want to keep that momentum going, kind of get back up there. Can Jimbo Fisher win the big one without Jameis Winston? Then for Alabama, obviously, that loss to Clemson. I don't want to lose back-to-back to ACC teams. I think that would be get some ire in Tuscaloosa if that happened. Yeah, well,
it's Alabama's one of the rare places, Kyle, you certainly know this, in which the expectation is to win a national championship every year. Talk a little bit about what you've seen coming into this matchup.
Well, this is all brand new for me coming into Tuscaloosa, and I've gotten a real quick taste of the magnitude of this matchup. I think what it comes down to is Alabama coming off the loss to Clemson. They're still chomping at the bit. They're still hungry. Nick Saban just signed the contract extension. He's hungry. He's really excited for this year's group coming into Atlanta, and I think it presents a great matchup for Florida State. Florida State with their amazing defense returning, and Alabama with so many components on both sides of the football coming in. And you're right, the expectations when you talk to people of Tuscaloosa national championship, and I think we could get an early taste of a big-time later season showdown right in week 1.
I'll stay with you, Kyle, here, because I want to ask you, what does Bama have to do to win the game? Let's just go big picture stuff here in the opener, and then we'll kind of break it down with each returning segment.
Well, I think they have to establish the run game. I think everybody knows that, and it's going to be no different with new offensive coordinator Brian Dable. A lot of people have been calling him Brian Run the Ball because you have so many running backs in the backfield for Alabama. You return Bo Scarborough, who you saw light up Clemson before he got injured. You also have Damian Harris, who ran for 1,000 yards last year. You also have Joshua Jacobs, who's probably one of the best backs that nobody knows about. And then you have the nation's #1 player from the class of 2017 in Najee Harris. So I think Alabama has to establish that running game. They're going to want to control the tempo. And I think that's certainly something they can do just with the amount of backs that they have. It's going to be really interesting to see which back gets the most reps leading off. But I think, that's what separates Alabama is the fact that they have so much depth. Quality depth is just incredible, especially at the running back. Nobody does it bigger and better than Alabama in the run game.
Well, I think I know what your answer is going to be, Gene, but let's hear it. What does Florida State, big picture, have to do to have a chance to win this game?
Well, I think there's 3 things I really need to focus on. One, you look at the pattern of Alabama when they've struggled in games. Teams have been able to throw the ball effectively. So we talked about it. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. You got to protect Francois against, I think it was Arkansas, Ole Miss, and Clemson. I think all those teams threw for 400 or more yards against Alabama. Everyone else to average 132. So you better throw the ball effectively. You're going to give Alabama a challenge. And I think number 2, what was a crazy stat Alabama? Was it 14 non-offensive touchdowns last season? I mean, that's nuts. FSU cannot give them easy scores, whether that's special teams or on defense. Giving them easy ones, they can't do that. And I think at the end of the day, that defense needs to carry FSU, especially early in this game. They can't let Alabama effectively move the ball up and down the field. FSU's got 9 of 11 starters back. They got all-world Derwin James back there. They need to show that on the field.
What would negatively impact each of these teams' chances to win the game? You could always cite any number of things, but is there one thing that if it happened to Alabama would have the biggest impact on their opportunity to win this game?
I think it's special teams. I mean, we saw a little bit of Alabama struggle in the spring game. They went 3 for 6. Andy Papanassis missed a couple field goals, and it was actually their punter, J.K. Scott, who had to come in the spring game to kick the game-winning field goal. So those small special teams items are going to come up, and especially in a game like this, if it's close down the end and Alabama can't, hit a 30-plus yard field goal, that could potentially be the downfall in a big-time game like this. So I'd certainly go to something as simple as special teams, which is obviously so important.
At big games, it always is. What would you say, Gene, is if the one thing that cannot happen for Florida State if they expect to win this game?
Well, it's the one thing I think every fan is afraid of, FSU fan going into that game, is that Alabama's defensive line absolutely manhandles FSU's offensive line. DeAndre Francois spends most of the game on his back. They can't get that offense on track. It creates turnovers, all the things that happen when you get consistent pressure, you get in a backfield, it creates havoc for an offense. If that happens, it's going to be a long night for Florida State.
I think it's an interesting question to move from that to this, and that is, how important is this game? Because honestly, you could argue that either one of these teams could lose the game and still find their way back into the playoff at the end of the year. It's such a great matchup from a ranking standpoint. You won't be penalized that bad unless you get blown out. So how important is this game for Alabama?
It's very important. I mean, it's the first big-time game of the college football season. It's on prime time, ABC. Everybody's going to be watching. It's in the new Atlanta Falcons football stadium. It's going to be packed. These two rivals, they do have storied history in the most part, and they haven't played in quite some time. Everybody's going to be watching. They want to see what Alabama can do, especially with Jalen Hurts coming back for his sophomore season. Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, great storylines. I can't wait to talk more about it, but I mean, there's so much that we could talk about.
Gene, how important is it for Florida State to win this game?
Well, I think you just talk about is important. Yeah, it's important for all the reasons Kyle stated. It's national stage. You get that momentum going back to back. You're playing the undisputed kings of college football for the past decade. I mean, if FSU's able to get that win, obviously that's huge for the program. Is it essential? Probably not. If you go on and win the ACC, you travel to Clemson, you beat them, you win the ACC, I think you're still in that playoff. Because like you said, Jeff, you're not going to get penalized. Unless you get blown out, you're not penalized for losing this game. FSU takes care of business. The nice thing, though, if you win, gives you a little wiggle room. You can potentially stumble in a game against somewhere in the ACC. You still win the conference, you're just fine in that thing. So important, yes. Essential, maybe not.
On the next preview, we'll take a look at Alabama's passing game led by Jalen Hurts going against the return of Derwin James for Florida State and FSU's defense. That's on the next preview.